Okay, so the story we're going to read today is the story of Jacob that I started with the kids. It's from Genesis chapter 28, verses 10 through 19. Jacob left his home, Beersheba, and went toward a land called Haran. He came to a certain place and stayed there for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he dreamed that there was a stairway set up on the earth, the top of it reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And God stood beside him and said, I am the God of Abraham your father, the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and in your offspring. Know that I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I've done all that I have promised you. Then Jacob woke from his sleep, and he said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he'd put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. And he called that place Bethel, the house of God. So before we take a closer look at this story about Jacob and his original stairway to heaven moment, it's probably where that came from. I checked out the lyrics. No other connection than the title. It's a Led Zeppelin song for those of you who... But I want to thank Levon once again for being the first to accept my invitation to share with us a time when you felt the presence of God in your life, and doing that so beautifully. I know that lots of you, as I said before, have had experiences of sensing God speaking to you and leading you somehow in your life, times of serendipity, the word that's sometimes used, that magical sense of just the right thing showing up at just the right time. Times, when you found the right words in a book or on a show, or somebody said something or gave you something, or, some experience that happened that made you feel that, is it odd or is it God thing, And part of what church is about is being a community when those things happen that will encourage each other to say, no, it's God, go with God. You can trust that. We'll help you trust that. But, we also want to have healthy skepticism and ask each other and ourselves all the questions. We don't want to get off on some, subjective personal trip and put words in God's mouth. There's a danger and all that. But on the other hand, God is so often speaking to us, and sometimes we miss it. All right, more about that in a minute. It takes courage, though, to do what Levon did. And, it reminded me of a Seinfeld joke on the episode of a Seinfeld show, in that TV show, and during the sometimes he does stand-up routines in his show, and as part of that, and in his routine he said, I came across a study where people were asked what's their greatest fear in life, and they compiled the results and then came up with the number 2 or 1 and 2 fears. Number 2 is the fear of dying. Number 1 was the fear of public speaking. And he said, so that basically means that most people would rather be in the casket than give the eulogy. Back to Jacob. This is actually the lectionary text. I didn't choose this because of the invitation to Levon this morning, but it was a perfect one to go with that, because Jacob has one of his most powerful formational God moments in his life, right when he needed it the most. And so it's perfect. It's a lectionary text. For those of you who might not know, the lectionary is a list of scriptures that a number of denominations together publish. And the idea is to try to get as many churches across denominations all using the same biblical text at the same time to create some unity, and also to prevent the pastors from only preaching about their favorite texts and avoiding the others. I always look at it. I don't always often use it. I think it's important to depart from that for the sake of the Spirit's leading. But anyway, this is the lectionary text. Now, to get a little more out of this, and those of you who come to Bible study know, one of our hermeneutical or Bible interpretive principles is context. And it often helps to say, okay, what happened before this? And so let me just first quickly set the context for you. Jacob was the grandson of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah were the couple through whom God began the Jewish people. And the people of Islam as well. Abraham and Sarah were very old. The Bible says they were close to 100 years old. In one place it says they were as good as dead. And then God speaks to them and says, I want you to leave the land that's familiar and safe to you. And I want you to go to a new place and just trust that I'm going to provide for you. They probably, like most of us, would have thought, you should ask me this about 30 years ago, maybe. Too old, start over. But the amazing thing about Abraham and Sarah, God did not choose them because they were good. But maybe God chose them, at least in part, because God had a sense that they were crazy enough to be the kind of people who would say, okay, God, when they were asked to do something that was out of the comfort zone. And there's a lot of sermons right in there. Mary Cosby, who's the wife of Gordon Cosby, whom I've mentioned very often, one of my greatest influences, she one time said, the problem with taking a risk on faith and being a darn fool, and she didn't say darn, is that the two often look exactly the same. And so the first miracle in Abraham and Sarah's journey was that they, as old people, said, okay, we'll leave everything and go to some place completely new and take something completely new on in response to you, God. We'll do it. And, there's a message there. How often do we talk ourselves out of doing what somehow deep down we know God wants us to do? And I know for a lot of us, the problem is, how do you know? I can't get clear. I don't know. I'm just talking about when you do know. And often that comes just in a deep nudge, a deep sense that this makes more sense, or maybe something is out of integrity and you need to let that go. You know what the right thing to do is, but we spend so much time doubting that's God's Spirit talking to us, or questioning, or seeing both sides of everything, or equivocating. I'm only saying this because I've done it a zillion times myself. I've talked myself out of the power of simply saying, when I know it's clear, okay, let's do it. So God then sends an angel. Once they said yes, then God sends an angel to Abraham and Sarah. And, most of you know the story. Sarah had never been able to have children. They were way past childbearing age. And the angel shows up and tells both Abraham and Sarah separately that Sarah is going to get pregnant and bear a child. And both of their responses were exactly the same. Some of you know the story well. Each of them busted out laughing when the angel told them. And Abraham was almost 100 years old. He was like, Sarah getting pregnant, that's going to take a miracle, trust me. And Sarah had the same experience. And the angel simply said, with God, nothing's impossible. Trust God. And they did. And sure enough, Isaac was born. And Isaac literally means laughter, or he laughs. Some scholars say the best translation for the name Isaac would be God has a sense of humor. Now let's fast forward. Isaac grows up. He and his wife Rebekah have two sons, non-identical twins, Esau and Jacob. Esau comes out just a little before Jacob. And for reasons we won't get into, Rebekah, the mom, preferred the younger Jacob to Esau. Ouch for Esau. And to make a long story short, when Isaac was about to die, Jacob's father, Rebekah and Jacob cooked up a scheme. Now, by the way, that was a pun, and those of you who know the story, you will get it. I know a lot of you aren't. Ask me later. Cooked up a scheme to manipulate things and to trick Esau out of his blessing of being the firstborn child. And when Isaac was about to die, Isaac mistakenly blessed Jacob, patriarchal tradition, instead of Esau. When Esau realized, he was furious. Esau was a tough guy, a rough guy, and in all seriousness, Esau said, I'm killing Jacob. Mom found out about it, said to Jacob, you got to go, and don't come back. Your brother's going to kill you. And that's the backstory of where we find Jacob in the story this morning. He's on the run for his life. He just ripped his brother off out of something pretty precious. And he goes as far as he can go and gets at the end of that first day. And you know the story. He was exhausted. He found a stone, had the dream. And in that dream, God tells him exactly what he needed to hear the most at that moment in his life. I'll say more about that in just a sec. But after the dream, then Jacob wakes up and says, whoa, that was intense. Actually, the Bible says he was afraid and said, this is awesome. The word fear in Hebrew means both afraid or just in awe. It's a much better translation usually to go with awe. All right. What does this mean for us? 3 simple things. First, God knows when we really need some encouragement. What do you most need to hear from God now? If there is a God, I'm betting my life there is, God knows exactly what you need to hear this morning. So the next time you, like Jacob, are scared, facing something extremely uncertain that you're not quite sure how you're going to get through, let alone how things are going to go, maybe on the run from yourself, in a transition, or maybe just feeling more alone than ever, or when something you tried to make happen blows up and makes a mess, or when you find yourself in some place you never planned on being and never imagined you would be, then the word to us is stop and look and listen and be open to and for the message that you need to hear from God. And don't make it too hard to hear it. Jacob had a dream. And he trusted that that dream was a word from God. Most of us, when we have significant dreams, are very good at discounting them as being particularly significant or having a message for us. And yes, dreams are hard to work with. They can be very confusing, and some are probably more tied to what you ate before you went to bed than a message from God. It's confusing. But the Bible is full of people who made the story-changing moves in their lives in response to things like dreams and visions and God moments that they probably could have explained away if they had chosen to, or just ignored. So my point is that a lot of us have whispers from God that we don't listen to. And ask all the questions you need to ask. Find people in your life that you can actually bounce this stuff around with and say, you know, I know this is going to sound crazy maybe, but what do you think about this? I've shared these quotes from depth psychologist Carl Jung a few times over the years. He said, a dream unanalyzed is a letter from God unopened. When asked why God doesn't seem to speak through dreams and visions to people anymore the way God did in the Bible, Carl Jung famously said, because we won't stoop low enough. In other words, we think we're too smart and sophisticated to pay attention to that stuff. So be open to all the ways God may speak to you through these chance encounters, visions, guided meditations, practices that author Cynthia Bourgeault refers to as that take us into the imaginal realm. And one of my most powerful prayer practices personally is shamanic journeying. It's a practice of using your imagination to go into a trance-like state in which one often sees visions in which the Spirit speaks to us in one way or another. I've taught it to our midweek inhale group as a spiritual practice. And sometime we'll have an in-person gathering for anybody who wants to learn this. I would love to teach it to you. I have had things given to me in that imaginal realm through shamanic journeying that 10 years of talk therapy wouldn't have touched. So be open, okay? That's my main point here. God is still speaking, and God's trying to get through to you. And if you're wondering if some woo-woo moment of yours is actually God, let's get together and talk about it. I'll help you bounce it around. Second, and the points 2 and 3 aren't as long. In Jacob's dream, God said to Jacob the words that he needed to hear. And you know what? That message that Jacob got was the message that we usually need to hear in one way or another as well. And that is, could be passive aggressive. I don't know. We won't go too much longer, I promise. That's a message. All right. Where was I? The words simply, don't miss this. I'm with you. God says, I'm with you. Whatever you're facing. And we had a little repeat after me one time in church. We won't do it today, but the thing I want you to learn is that this is the only promise pastorally that I can ever make to anybody with 100% certainty. God will give you whatever you need to face whatever you've got to face. That was the message. Jacob, you do have a wild ride ahead of you, and I will be with you. Jacob was not spared many, many difficult experiences, but God saw him through them all. That is the promise of faith. So whatever you're looking at today, hear that. You're not alone. You'll be given what you need. Finally, The importance of place. This last week I came across a little meme on social media. I shared it with our morning devotion group. It said this. It said, there are two places you need to go often. The place that heals you and the place that inspires you. Could be a literal place. Hopefully to some degree it's here in worship. But where do you need to go literally or metaphorically when you need healing, inspiration? The Celtic Christian tradition had this concept of what they called thin places. That there are actually places in the natural world that become thin, where the veil that separates this world from the things of God seems really thin. And that's kind of what I was encouraging Jada and Langston to think about. Is there a special place where maybe something beautiful has happened for you? Maybe a place you can go to where that tends to happen to you. So go there and listen and honor that place. I had a friend up north when I lived in northern Wisconsin for 10 years. A guy named Nick Vanderpie. He was a fishing guide up there. And Nick and I and a bunch of other people there were in solidarity with the Native American tribes up there when the treaty rights controversy hit back in the 80s. We formed an organization called Citizens for Treaty Rights. Nick was a real warrior on behalf of the tribes. And when we got to know each other, he finally said, you know, I don't really usually like working with clergy. I said, why not? And he said, well, number one, you represent an institution that refuses to tell the truth. So I'm always suspicious of you guys. Fair enough. But he said, clergy in particular, here's the problem with you guys. You're always just passing through. You never stay in one place. So that makes it hard to trust you. He said, I love this piece of land up here. I'm never leaving northern Wisconsin. I'm going to die on this piece of land that I have. So I will fight for it and what's best for it. You're probably going to go. And he was right. And that made me think, well, a few things. But I came across an article recently where it was talking about stability. And it said, you know, stability is extremely important. And it requires transparency. And the other night, after a meeting, Jeff Brink, I don't know if Jeff's watching on Zoom or not, but he said something to me. He said, we're not going to have to get a search committee together anytime soon, are we? And so I want you to know my response to that. I mean, I think I flippantly said something. Well, I don't have any plans, you know, and it would probably make a lot of sense for me financially to max out my Social Security. So there's 5 or 6 years right there. But here's my deeper response to that. It's all about call. I mean, God can call me anywhere at any time. One of my favorite Bible verses is from James, where it says, boast not of tomorrow, for you know not what today brings forth. If my daughter had been seriously ill a couple of years ago, I might have had to move. Who knows? But apart from that, I'm not going anywhere. You're it. This church is it. I'm not going to look for another church. Something could call me, but, well, thank you. No, but I just want you to know that. So what does that mean? Oh, you know, probably 5 or 6 years if I stay healthy. I mean, we don't know. But I'm not going anywhere, so I just want you to not, when I say things like pastors just pass through, I'm not trying to send an indirect message. Last thing about place. Marianne Williamson, some of you are familiar with Marianne Williamson? She's a spiritual teacher for whom I have a lot of respect. She's been ridiculed a bit as a presidential candidate, and other people think she's flaky, but she's not flaky. But I heard her one time addressing a crowd of people, and she was talking about forgiveness. And after she was done, there was some Q&A, and one person in the crowd raised his hand, and he said, I don't really have a question, but I need to tell you that while you were speaking, something profound happened inside me. I don't really understand it, but I have been holding a grudge against someone for about 30 years. And as you were speaking about forgiveness, something happened and the walls finally broke down and something shifted in me, and I know I have forgiven that person. And I'm going to tell him. And Marion did something that I thought was really powerful. She stopped the whole gathering. She said, now everybody, if you're having a side conversation, everybody stop and pay attention. What just happened was very important. The world just changed for this man. And then she said, folks, life is as deep as you play it. When something like this happens, you have to mark the place. Ritualize it somehow. Don't let it pass by you. So she said, I want everybody who's around this guy, you gather around him. Those of you who think this is nuts, just go somewhere else. But everybody else, go over there and lay your hands on him, and I'm going to pray for him. And she prayed, God, seal this miraculous moment of healing for this man. Don't let him leave here and let it just dissipate the way these moments so often do if we don't own them and mark them. So when something very powerful happens for you, mark the place so you can come back to it. If you need a milestone, I got a bunch. All right, that's enough for one day.